All right, seniors, welcome to our next unit. We're going to cover some. This is a heavy poetry unit, as is typically the case with this time period, and with you know, sorry, make sure my audio is working. It looks like everything's up. Okay, sorry about that pause. Um, a lot of British literature this time is going to be poetry driven, and this is not my students' usual their favorite chapter. I personally kind of enjoy this. Okay, I think there's a lot of good that happens in it, but I understand that some people struggle with it, so we definitely want to get these videos out to you. So we're going to be looking at John Donne, who probably out of all of these people, has claim to being the most important. I would say there's definitely an argument to be made for some of the other characters too, the other writers too. But John Donne definitely has a very strong place of importance. Okay. Uh, Donne is. We're going to look at a poem from early in his career, and then one from later, and then another poem that I believe also probably falls in the later spectrum. But people struggle with this, and the reason they struggle with it, and if you want to follow along, we're going to look at page 480, I believe, to start with. One of the reasons people struggle with this type of poetry is it's what's known as metaphysical poetry, and all sorts of crazy definitions you come up with for metaphysical. But I'm going to tell you, like, to simplify it to its base, the basest possible thing, it's might as well be called poetry that you're going to have to think a lot about because it deals with big stuff. Deals with more than just the simplistic concepts of love or just death. It deals with things like the afterlife. It deals with things. The word metaphysics. We're going beyond the physical. So there's a lot of intellectual and philosophical stuff in this, and you can spend hours dissecting these poems. Now, obviously, I don't expect that from you, but it does tend to cause problems for people. All right. So why do they teach it? Well, every time I've been in a high school class that's taught this section, it's always about teaching one particular thing, which, to be honest with you, I don't think is the way to do this. It's so that they can teach what a conceit is. Okay. And so a conceit is just a type of metaphor. We know what a metaphor is. Metaphor is where you compare two unlike things. All right. Comparing apples to oranges, not a metaphor because those are very similar in so many ways. Comparing apples to a chair, much different. Okay, so at that point, by nature, metaphors require a lot of thought unless the author really spells it out for you. Which, lucky for you, that's what conceits often do. It's an extent. The simple definition is an extended metaphor. So it's a metaphor that is stretched out over, instead of just one or two lines, it goes on for stanzas maybe. So it usually kind of really fleshes out what the metaphor is about, and that's on purpose because that metaphor is essential to the understanding of the piece. So they want to make sure you get it. They don't want to leave it up to chance. Okay. Now here's my thing about conceits. Honestly, I don't think they should even be considered a thing. It's still a metaphor, whether it's one line or nine. A metaphor is a metaphor. So I feel like a lot of the times in literature we just like to give extra terms just to I mean, my AP classes, goodness, the words they have to memorize sometimes, it may show up on the AP test, or so many of them are words that just really there's no real reason for them, except for, a few instances they may appear in so that you can sound smart. So I've always seen John Donne used in high school to teach the concept of conceits, particularly with the second poem we're going to look at, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. Honestly, I'm going to point them out to you just so that, if you find a college class that expects you to know it, you'll know it. But to be honest with you, these should be studied because they're good poems. They should be studied because they represent, a man working at the pinnacle of the craft, not some random, terms that you'll probably never need. Okay. So, and I realize that reading these, you may say to yourself, well, why will I ever need any of this? Nobody's saying you will, but it's the same thing as like, why will you ever need to listen to that particular musician? Or why would you ever have to read that particular book? Why would you have to ever go look at that particular painting? There's no purpose in any of it. It's just something that can be enjoyable. And I really think that when you see anyone working at the peak of their craft, it's worth studying. Okay. All right. So we're going to go flip over to 42. And we're going to look at our first poem by John Donne. And of the three, my least favorite, although it's still good. All right. It's not a bad one. All right, so what we're going to look at here is we've got five octaves. In other words, there's 8 lines in this. Oddly enough, there should be 10 quatrains in my opinion, but I'm not the guy that wrote it. Because the first 4 lines and the second 4 lines of each stanza really operate with a different rhyme scheme, and they actually kind of seem to convey a different idea usually. So it's kind of weird. I'm sure there's a reason that Donne chose to do them this way, but that being said, when you're looking at these, the first four lines are quite simple. The next four are a little bit more problematic for most people. All right. So the context here is a guy is there's two ways you can look at this. Just like the next poem, there's two ways to look at it. A lot of people look at this as this guy and his girlfriend are just he's leaving her. By leaving isn't like going on a trip. I think you can also look at it as leaving her as this is maybe a breakup poem. But you can go either way with it. It doesn't really change. It doesn't really matter. What we have is a separation of some sort, whether it's long or short term. Okay. So it starts off, sweetest love, I do not go for weariness of thee, nor in hope the world can show a fitter love for me. So right away, those first four lines, the rhythm and the rhyme make these very easy to follow. He's basically just telling her, hey, look, I'm not leaving because I'm bored with you or I found someone else. Okay, a good way to start, whether you're breaking up or leaving just on a trip, you'd want to make sure those things are covered. And then he says, but since that I must die at last, 'tis best to use myself in jest, thus by feigned deaths to die. Now, again, the rhythm and the rhyme in the second four of each line is a little bit different, and it can cause some problems for people who are not great with poetry. Um, it seems to me that he's saying here, since at some point I'm gonna die, and then we'll be separated for real. We might as well, practice and learn how to do it here. So, which is not probably the best way to go about breaking up or going on a trip. So look at our next four. Yesternight the sun went hence, and yet he is here today. He hath no desire nor sense, nor half so short away. So that's kind of a conceit, although it's barely hitting the limit. It's a full like four lines where the man compares himself to the sun, which of course part of the deal with the metaphor is you have to have two unlike things. So when he says, he's basically saying yesterday the sun was here and then it left. So and we don't give it any misery. I'm like the sun. First of all, I'm a person with intellect. The sun isn't. Plus, it's not nearly as long a distance for me. So obviously, if we can trust the sun to come back, you can trust me. That's what he points out in the next four. He says, then fear not me, but believe that I shall make speedier journeys, since I take more wings and spurs than he. So he's like, obviously, if you can trust the sun to come back, you can trust me. Okay, I guess. Third stanza. Oh, how feeble is man's power, that if good fortune fall, it cannot add another hour, nor a lost hour recall. So now we get a little bit more of the metaphysical, where he's taking their relationship, and now we're looking at the bigger picture type of thing, where he points out, mankind's power is so weak that no matter what we do, no matter how fortunate you are, you can't buy yourself another hour nor relive a past one. And he says, continuing on, but come bad chance, and we join it to our strength, and we teach it art and length itself or us to advance. He says, when bad things happen, we tend to let those things dominate us. We tend to let them take up our time. We tend to let them, you know, hours of our life, not days, weeks, months of it, years maybe even wasted on being concerned about this thing. He's trying to tell her, I mean, it's a fancy way of saying, hey, stop crying, get over it, okay? He's not trying to be negative or rude like that, but really that's what's going on here. And that's echoed in the next stanza. When thou sighest not when, but sighest my soul away. When thou weepest unkindly kind, my life's blood doth decay. It cannot be that thou lovest me as thou sayest, if in thine my life thou waste that art the best of me. The rhythm of this is so problematic for me to read even. I don't see this as one of his better poems. But that stanza anyway, after me stumbling through it, he's telling the girl that if you really loved me, you wouldn't cry and sigh and act this way because it makes me feel even worse. Now, if he's breaking up with her, that's a horrible thing to say. If he's just going on like, hey, I have to travel to, France for the next month, I'll be back, and she's doing that, I could see that being a more fitting descriptor there. Okay? He's basically telling her, hey, if you really loved me, you wouldn't make such a scene. That's going to be seen again in the next poem in a much prettier light. Okay? Finally, last stanza. Let not thy divining heart forethink me any ill. Destiny may take thy part, and may thy fears fulfill. But think that we are but turned aside to sleep. They who one another keep alive ne'er parted be. So he points out, like, look, I can't promise you that I might not come back. All right. I can't promise you that something might not change over these next few days. But if so, just imagine that we're two people who've fallen asleep and are in their own world. So when you sleep, you sleep, you're dreaming in your own world. She's dreaming in her world. He's like, and then keep each other close to your heart, and then we'll always be together. Okay. it's not a bad poem. It's very, there's nothing really unique or beautiful happening as far as neat twists, but poems don't have to have that. Okay. Now let's see a better example though. If you'll turn over the next page to a valediction forbidding mourning, and let's look at that title real quick. Again, 484, right? Valediction would just be like a formal statement, and then okay, your book says a farewell speech. I'm not, that I guess that's a better definition. So farewell speech forbidding, and then the word mourning here is the mourning of like being sad, not mourning like before noon. All right, so he's basically, this guy is going somewhere, our speaker is going somewhere, and he's forbidding his beloved from being upset about it, which of course, kind of similar to the last poem, right? A little bit more basic structure here. I like this. I like poems in quatrains. I like them to have a very simple rhyme scheme because I think that makes them more creative, to be honest with you. I used to not feel that way, but I definitely do now. All right. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say the breath goes now, and some say no. So right now we're imagining, and this sounds like death. Okay, this one, I guess you could again treat this as going on a trip, but this one, death. This first stanza here, when he says, "Whisper their souls to go," to me that's fancy poetry for death. All right, but he's saying, there's usually two responses. Some people accept it and they're like, you know, it's time, and other people fight it. And he's not talking about the people dying; he's talking about the people around them. It says what some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now. In other words, some of them accept it and realize that this is just part of life, and others fight against it. He says, so let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods nor sigh tempest move, twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity of our love. Now, I love that stanza. He's telling her basically, if he was just saying, he's like, we don't need to make a scene. If you just leave it at that, you sound like a jerk. But he points out, let's not make a scene because it would cheapen our love to let the rest of the people in on it. It's the scene of someone, at a funeral who like throws himself across the coffin and sobs uncontrollably. I'm not saying people can't be sad, but at some point you wonder how much of that is not, you know, it, you know, accidental or purposeful, acting to try to, look how sad I am. Look how upset I am. We even see it. You guys didn't read Hamlet, but in the play Hamlet, where Hamlet and Laertes dive into the grave of a woman who just died. It's Hamlet's girlfriend. It's Laertes' sister, and they go in there to fight over who loves her more. Like that matters at that point. So a lot of time these big scenes are not so much about the dead person as they are about the living. So the speaker here is pointing out, let's not make a scene. This isn't about other people. This is our situation. The smoothing of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant, but trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. So, he's pointing out how people, interpret all of these signs and make them mean much more than they are. But he says, honestly, at the end of the day, we know they don't mean anything. And I guess he's saying the same thing about this situation. You can read signs and assume there's all these things going on when it's just the way things are. Whether it's death or leaving, these are just things that happen. He says, dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence because it doth remove those things which elemented it. He says, people who don't really understand love, people who are more, it's about lust than it is love, can't handle being apart. Okay, that's more, in love than a couple that's been together 30 years and, the husband has to go away on, on a business trip and he's going to be gone for 2 weeks. You know, and the wife's like, that's great, have a good time, and she doesn't cry. It doesn't mean their love is any less. In fact, according to our speaker here, it's more grounded than the kind that can't admit to have someone gone for a day. But we by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. Inner assure them night, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. He says our love, which is much stronger, doesn't require physical presence to thrive. This is our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go endure not yet a breach, but like an expansion, like gold to airy thinness be. He says, so our love is like gold that is stretched out and it's still connected no matter how far apart it gets. Gold's a really malleable metal. It's one of the things that makes it great for jewelry is that you can stretch it like that to like very thin and it won't snap. I mean, eventually, of course, it will, but it's pretty good about being bendable. Now, that is not the conceit. A lot of the times, if you were to just turn kids loose and say, hey, read this, pick out the conceit, a lot of them will pick that out. That is just a regular metaphor. In fact, it's a simile. Similes are a type of metaphor, okay? Again, the reason we have to separate those is weak. All right, but the last three stanzas give us our actual conceit, and this is the thing that's always used to teach conceits. All right, and it's going to be, if you're looking on 484, you have a picture of a compass, and those of you who aren't following on the book, we don't mean a compass like what tells you where north is. We mean a compass like those things you used to use in like middle school, when you would, it had two legs that were connected at the top. One had a sharp point. One of them had like a piece of a pencil in it, and you would turn it, and it would make a circle. That's the one we're talking about. Okay. So he's going to compare their love to a compass, which, what a weird. The thing about good metaphors is they are weird like this. They're unique because it makes you think, how is love like a compass? Now he's going to explain it, and it makes perfect sense. And it requires a lot of thought to construct a metaphor like this. Because if they be two, they are two, so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do it. So he says it's like our souls are each one of the legs of the compass. They're still connected, so technically they're one. He's like, and when they're sitting there together, one can't move unless you move the other one. Now, the one in the middle looks like it's not moving, but it's turning. If you're doing it right, it's not moving off of that point, but it's still moving. It says, and though in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it and grows erect as that comes home. He says they also, if you really, and this is what makes this metaphor beautiful, is that he says as the compass works, the centerpiece leans towards the other one. They're always still connected in a way. No matter, what part of the circle the one piece is on, the other one leans in that direction. So that's really pretty. He says, such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. You have the image then of them drawing the circle, which comes right back to where it started if you did it correctly. And he's saying her love is going to allow him to return to that same spot one day. So this is far superior to the first poem we read, in my opinion. Okay, now you can have disagreements, obviously, but it's good. Again, it's so much more than just here's what a conceit is. It's a beautiful poem in general, talking about how to develop a metaphor, which is not easy. All of that is found in this, okay? All right, let's look at something that has nothing to do with either of the two we just read. This just shows some of Donne's later work, I believe, and this is going to be Holy Sonnet 10. All right, so notice this one's Holy Sonnet. John Donne was a very famous preacher, very important one in his time. So he's going to deliver a sonnet here, 14 lines. And this one is going to deal with a religious aspect for sure. Okay. Right away, let's see who he's talking to and what he says about them. This is used in your book to teach the concept of a paradox, which you should have now, but we'll talk about it. It's at the end. It says, death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. So right away we get he is talking to death, and he's telling death, hey, back down. You're not near as tough as you think you are. Okay. So the rest of the poem could hope is going to be explaining how death, which is something that most people fear greatly, is not tough. It says, for those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. So again, that's kind of paradoxical. He's like, the people you kill aren't really dead. And he says, and you can't kill me. Well, if we're looking at that just on the surface, of course, the people who death have killed are dead. And of course, you will die too. So it seems like that is not true. But wait. It says, from rest and sleep, which are but thy pictures be, sorry, let me try that one again. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. He says, really, in all honesty, death is like being asleep, and that's pleasant. So if you die and you sleep for a longer period, obviously that's a good thing. So he's even trivializing death to make it look like it's a positive. Remember again, our title here is a holy sonnet, so we are obviously going to see the Christianized view of this, of death. Okay. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell. It says, even our best men die. This is something everyone goes through. And in fact, you rely on other people to carry out your will. You're not of your own that tough. It says, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well and better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou then? He's like, I personally think those lines are a reference to, poppies and things like that people can take to medicate themselves and even, sadly kill themselves. To the point, he says that we can take our own lives in our hands. So why do you act like why are you so pompous? Why are you so proud? You've done nothing. It says, one short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So there's where the religious aspect comes in. He says, in all honesty, when people die, it's this rest. And, you can argue about whether it's an immediate you're in heaven or whether there's this time period where you're left before, the resurrection or whatever you want to buy, because Donne's not really being specific here. But he says that after that rest, you wake, and then you can't die anymore. Then you're in heaven, or in all honesty, hell. Either way, life's eternal. And he said at that point there'll be no more death, and in fact, death will die, which again is your major paradox here. The idea of death dying seems like it doesn't work, but when you look at it in that context, it most definitely does. All right. So really pretty. I remember I love sonnets. Sonnets are just simple. There's not the last two poems. There's a lot of unpacking you have to do. With sonnet, there's really not. It's really beautiful. They really key in on the wording and things like that. So I love Holy Sonnet 10. Just as a heads up, I'm not going to ask you to read it, but it's worth looking at. Meditation 17, which comes on pages 488 through 490, is kind of like a little sermon that Donne would have delivered. Some famous lines come from it. No man is an island unto himself. You also get the for whom the bell tolls, that kind of theory. And it's right there at the beginning. Now this bell tolls softly for another, says to me, thou must die. But then you also get where is it? I gotta find it. Here it is at the bottom of page 489. It says, therefore, never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Okay, really powerful thing dealing with the concept of death. And how the death of others impact us, even if we don't think it does, and the fact that you don't exist on your own. You're not a loner who only depends on yourself. So it's a really powerful thing. I'm not asking kids to read it because you can see we're already at 21 minutes, but I think it's worth reading. It's short, and it would be an enjoyable read, and it's definitely something that is from this time period of utmost importance. Okay. All right, so we're already at 21 minutes. Let's end here. I would love to spend more time talking about these, but again, time constraints prevent that. So I hope this helped those of you learning at home. I have a lot of people at home right now, so I feel like these are a necessity. So hopefully you're watching them and you're able to get through the questions I provided. Okay? All right, guys, well, have an excellent day, and I will see you back. We're going to cover some of Ben Jonson's poetry next. Most people like him a little better than John Donne, so hopefully that'll be the case. All right, guys, have an amazing afternoon.